45 years old, a sizzling porterhouse steak on the grill, and two-person settings laid out on the patio. I picked up a bottle of red, a 2015 vintage I'd saved for a significant occasion. The glasses were polished, napkins neatly arranged as Marisol liked, and a small candle flickered in the center of the table. The ambience resembled heartwarming advertisements, implying that love continues to flourish. I prepared the Bluetooth speaker, playing the playlist Callie made for me last Father's Day, filled with classic soul and just enough modern jazz to be purposeful. I kept glancing at the clock. 6:40 p.m., 6:55 p.m., 7:15 p.m. The wine had aged sufficiently. If I waited longer, the steak would burn. I assumed they were stuck in traffic, or Callie's late class ran overtime, or Marisol was delayed leaving work. However, something unusual caught my eye. My phone remained silent. No on our way text, no missed calls, nothing. Alone, this didn't raise alarms. But when I looked closer, there were no messages at all. Lately, they had been following a particular routine. Nonetheless, I moved the steak onto a serving platter, dried my hands, and activated my phone. Habit, inquiry, a touch of hunger, not only for sustenance, but also for clarity. And there it was, Instagram, the most recent post on my feed, a photo of my wife and daughter in Rome. Rome, Callie wearing oversized sunglasses, Marisol in an unfamiliar breezy sundress. Behind them were cobblestone streets and ivy-covered walls, colorful gelato clutched in their hands. They appeared carefree, vibrant, and luminous. The caption stated, "Girls trip airplane, spaghetti, Italy, self-care, na-drama." I fixed my gaze on it for so long the screen darkened. My mind attempted to justify it. Perhaps it was an old photo. Perhaps not. The timestamp indicated that it had been posted an hour earlier. Fresh. Current. I was recording the exact moment I stood there in a polo shirt, looking at a dinner nobody would attend. My hands grew cold, the knife slipping slightly against the steak as I divided it in half out of obstinacy. I sat down regardless. I filled the glass with wine, took a nibble. The steak was cooked to my preferred medium rare, yet it felt tough. I couldn't detect any flavor. It was my 45th birthday, a significant milestone. I envisioned cheerful laughter, perhaps a small present, maybe Collie teasing me about aging, and Marisol proposing a toast as we used to. Instead, I was met with silence. No phone call, no voicemail, just hashtags and spritzes of clothing purchased with my own funds, the same funds that, not long ago, we couldn't afford for a vacation together. They informed me we needed to save money this year due to financial constraints. Tuition expenses were high. Bills for utilities were escalating. I trusted them, so I canceled the trip I had planned, sacrificed the upgraded TV, and even added more to our shared account when Collie mentioned a shortfall in tuition payments. Yet, they continued to take selfies under the Mediterranean sun while I celebrated my birthday alone. At that table, each candle's flicker mocked my innocence subtly. Initially, I wasn't enraged. Instead, I felt hollow, as if my core had been drained and filled with fog. The empty chair opposite me, where Marisol usually sat, legs crossed, voicing her complaints about medium-rare steaks, remained a symbol of our shared history and memories. Now it was vacant. I returned to Collie's post on my phone, viewing additional photos. A boomerang showed them toasting glasses with the caption, "Ronkus Mark Dot." A slow pan of a luxurious, expansive, immaculate residence with an ocean view followed. It was costly, exclusive, a boutique hotel. I recognized that place, Palazzo Verdi. I had researched it once for a trip we never embarked on, knowing its five-star amenities, white marble bathtubs, gold fixtures, and breakfast terrace offering panoramic city vistas. I almost reserved it for our 15th anniversary, but the price was too exorbitant for Marisol. She'd stressed practicality, leading me to cancel. I chose a low-key alternative instead. Her response was minimal. Now, they were there sunlit and grinning with no reference to me, no tag, not even a hint of, "Wish you were here." Only hashtag self-care and my credit card footing the bill for each tiramisu slice. I left the rest of the steak uneaten. I funneled the wine back into the bottle, unwilling to waste it, but knowing I wouldn't savor it tonight. I stacked the plates, folded the napkins, turned off the music. The speaker whimpered softly as it disconnected. It sensed the evening had perished before it bloomed. I retreated indoors and took a seat on the bed's edge. Their pillows remained untouched. Callie's stuffed toy stayed by the nightstand, a keepsake from her childhood she hadn't parted with. The house was hushed, unusually so. No more slamming drawers, no hum of a hairdryer down the corridor, no laughter bouncing off the walls. Alone, armed with a phone brimming with deceit, in a space that transformed into an unscripted stage for me. Somewhere along the way, the grin I meticulously crafted in the mirror that morning, the one meant to welcome them, morphed into something else. Something harder, something determined. Not anger, not sorrow, just a change. An epiphany. They had abandoned me. Not only tonight, but gradually over years. They'd moved away, altered our tale so subtly that I didn't spot the revisions until they were enjoying cocktails on the other side of the globe. And now I wasn't simply excluded from the snapshot, I was nowhere in the picture. So I tackled the dishes, extinguished the porch light, and settled with my computer. Because if they could vanish without a trace, so could I. I remember every facet now, every phrase Marisol employed, every inflection in her voice as she outlined why we had to cancel our anniversary arrangements. It was on a Tuesday. She stood by the kitchen sink, donning one of her preferred large sweaters, asserting comfort and productivity. Moments ago, I transferred $4,200 into our shared account for the secretly planned trip over several months, a lakeside retreat in Vermont, complete with a private deck, stacked firewood, and waiting wine, envisioned as a chance to recharge. However, she glanced at me, sighed, and remarked, "Sweetheart, we'll have to forego it this year." The elevated electricity bill and Callie's possible additional financial aid needs for her courses had arisen, mirroring the reality of tuition. I remained unfazed, simply nodding in response. Such is love, making things work, trusting, believing in those who share your life journey. I proposed adding a bit more to ease the burden, and she replied tenderly, "You're so considerate towards us." And that was it. That was the disguise. The presentation exuded authenticity, but it wasn't an invoice or tuition. It was Rome, specifically the Palazzo Verdi, a luxury five-star hotel adorned with hand-painted ceilings and offering concierge services that extend to yacht reservations and personalized perfume suggestions. I recognized the location. I had earlier discovered a brochure for it hidden in one of her drawers, which she claimed was for a vision board. I had no inkling then that it was a blueprint. Now, unfolding in real time on social media, their vacation seemed like a macabre travel documentary. They were not concealing or delaying their posts to give the impression it wasn't happening now. There was no effort to create a semblance of deniability. Instead, they displayed sheer joy, carefully chosen hashtags, and smiles generously sponsored by a man they chose not to acknowledge. I continued scrolling, my eyes dry, my heart gradually emptying. Callie had shared a video of their room. The expansive vista of the Tyrrhenian Sea, immaculate white bed linens, a sizable soaking tub. She'd labeled it as genius. Genius echoed within me. For what type of genius deceives her spouse, exploits his compassion, and imparts to her child that treachery resembles closeness? I tapped on the hotel's location marker. A multitude of photos surfaced. Food that seemed like artwork, candlelit dinners on balconies, petals of flowers on pillows. I pondered if Marisol had arranged something unique for herself and Callie. Had they celebrated their freedom? Did they joke about what I could be doing while they watched the sun vanish behind buildings? Did they believe I wouldn't discover it? Or more troubling, did they not care? There was one post that lingered in my memory. It wasn't theirs. It was a secondary scene in someone else's narrative, a panoramic shot of the hotel's rooftop garden. And there, vaguely in focus, but undeniably them, were Marisol and Callie, heads close, laughing. Callie clutching a shopping bag bearing an unpronounceable Roman designer label, while Marisol sipped from a glass of Prosecco. They seemed relaxed and unaffected. It felt as if they'd entered another realm, leaving me behind. In my own house, our house, I found myself beside a limp birthday balloon, the one Callie would always stick to the fridge annually. "Happy birthday, Dad," still read the faded gold letters. This year, there was nothing, just an oppressive quietness that felt weaponized. The steak had grown cold, but I didn't discard it. Instead, it remained untouched on the plate, a relic of past celebrations. I reluctantly took another sip of wine, since if I was to swallow the truth, I might as well do it with something good. And there sat the candle, its wax trickling down the sides into crooked formations, like a frozen record of how the night dissipated. What hit me hardest wasn't the betrayal itself, but the ease with which it was executed. No fight, just quiet compliance. Without any preamble or forethought, there was merely an exchange of affection for distance, truth for luxury. They executed their plans flawlessly. As I envisioned, the moment they purchased the tickets, they must have rationalized it to themselves. It's necessary. He won't object. He'll comprehend. Instead, they presumed I would never uncover their secret, that I'd remain blissfully ignorant, the steadfast provider too devoted to challenge those I cared for. I rose and stepped into the hallway. Her scarf was still draped on the hook by the door. Collie's sneakers, shining white with lavender laces, lay beside the bench. Their belongings, their fragrance, their presence lingered, but their loyalty had earlier departed, boarding a plane. I opened the drawer where our bills and receipts were kept. Collie's tuition had already been settled weeks prior. I spotted the confirmation, so I wondered where the additional transfer had gone. Then I discovered it, a printed and neatly folded itinerary email hidden behind a stack of magazines. Waited for 2 days before she informed me our anniversary celebration had to be canceled. The Palazzo Verde reservation confirmation was there, $8,738 in total room, spa services, dinner package, private Vatican Gardens tour. My payment method, the card I seldom used except for special events. It was all there, stark and clear. What had been my generosity became their escape. My plans annulled, replaced by a holiday without even the courtesy of a call. I settled back at the table. The chilled steak, the snuffed-out candle, the quiet, and I made a choice. This wouldn't be one of those tales where the man forgives and forgets, where he anticipates an apology that never materializes, where he justifies infidelity because avoiding conflict seems simpler. No, this time, the silence would work for me. It would shield me, guide me. They'd pocketed my money, my trust, and my birthday, but they hadn't taken my name. They hadn't taken my home. They hadn't touched the part of me that was finally mine. Realized that love without respect is merely a tether. Yet, I had decided to break free from it. Grabbed the laptop and started typing. Sleep eluded me that night, not due to fury or sorrow. Instead, it was those images, those lies draped in cashmere and sunset filters that refused to leave my mind's eye. The coziness of the photos they shared starkly contrasted with the icy blade piercing my heart. I lay there, gazing at the ceiling fan rotating overhead, hearing the soft hum of the silent house, our house. My house, a place I'd labored for, battled for, and paid for. The walls I painted with Marisol. The kitchen backsplash we selected together. The hallway den where Collie crashed her bike into the wall when she was 8. Each memory, each effort, each drop of sweat and patience, they were all mine. Yet, so was the lucidity that descended before dawn. At some point, I swung my legs off the bed, sat at the edge, and simply stared around the room. The empty side of the bed remained untouched, undisturbed. I ventured towards her nightstand, pulling open the drawer. Inside lay lavender hand cream, a partially read romance novel, and an e-reader. The same space housed her travel plans. I moved to the other drawer, mine. It was orderly, systematic. There I found my birth certificate, our insurance papers, and the title deed for the house. My name was there, solely mine, clear, printed, notarized, stamped. I rose and meandered through the house leisurely. Every picture on the wall, every mug in the cabinet, every decorative pillow felt like small trinkets in a game I hadn't noticed I was losing. Or perhaps I never stood a chance to win. I wouldn't yell, I wouldn't rage. Such actions would offer them ammunition for mockery. Instead, I decided to move as silently as they did on my birthday. At 9:04 a.m., I dialed Adam Whitley, my real estate agent. He was a taciturn man, trustworthy, seldom inquisitive. I had employed him several years ago to aid Marisol's cousin in finding a rental when she moved from Arizona. He answered on the second ring. "Jonas," he questioned, slightly taken aback. "What do you?" "I need a cell," I interjected, keeping my composure. "The house, swiftly, as quietly as possible. Preferably a cash buyer." There was a momentary silence on the line, a hint of puzzlement. "Are you sure?" he queried. "That's quite a leap, buddy. You and Marisol planning something new?" I acknowledged his query with a smile, suppressing it. "We are," I replied succinctly, "a change in course." He suggested visiting that afternoon. I agreed. The hours preceding his arrival were spent packing quietly, meticulously. I moved as if I had endless time, but inside, it felt like a switch had been flipped. I didn't want to take everything. I didn't want furnishings or artwork or even most of my clothes. I wanted mementos, items that held personal and sentimental value for me. My guitar, the one I played on our front porch every summer since moving in. My father's gold watch received on my 30th birthday. The fishing rod my grandfather gave me when I was 13. These items found their place in the trunk of my car. In essence, everything remained unchanged. I no longer required evidence for debate. Adam appeared in a navy blazer, as usual with his folder adorned with tabs, highlighters, and marginal notes. He entered the entrance hall, surveyed the area, and cocked his head quizzically. "Is all well?" he inquired tentatively. I affirmed with a nod. Suddenly, I understood I wouldn't wait any more. He didn't seek clarification afterwards. That was one of his appealing traits. He silently explored the house, taking notes. Upon reaching the kitchen, he halted and faced me. "If you grant me a week to prepare, we could secure a substantial asking price," he suggested. "Or if you wish to expedite matters, I might know a prospective buyer." I met his gaze squarely. Speed, discretion, these were the essential aspects. He subtly nodded and made a call. I caught him mentioning the neighborhood, square footage, and then something that startled me. "No, I believe this isn't about finances, but emotions. Yes, it's spotless. Entirely mine without any loans." His eyes gleamed with curiosity as he looked at me. The paperwork was immediately signed at our usual dining table, where we used to indulge in pancake sundaes. A chuckle almost escaped, but bitterness wasn't within me. Instead, a sense of liberation seeped in, like sunlight filtering through Venetian blinds. By evening, Adam called again. "The buyer wishes to inspect the property tomorrow," he said, offering cash. "Clothing within a week." No queries asked. "Completed," I responded. That night, I sat in the vacant room filled with boxes I didn't desire and memories I no longer needed. I stared out of the window, watching the porch light dance across the driveway, waiting for a car that would never return. I envisioned them still in Rome, perhaps on a gondola, perhaps sipping espresso. Maybe they were discussing souvenirs. Maybe they bought each other identical bracelets, tokens of loyalty crafted at someone else's expense. I hoped the spritz numbed the remorse. I wished the pasta tasted triumphant, as upon their return, they would discover the true price of deceit. The following morning, I encountered the purchaser. He arrived in a black SUV, darkened windows, soft music pulsating. A man in his mid-50s, solid build, weathered hands, seemingly too worn. He identified himself as Terrence, lived 2 houses away. Divorced, children grown, employed in logistics. Eager for efficiency. "You the vendor?" he queried. "Indeed," I replied. He appraised the property, hands on his hips. Typically, this was his approach. "Good structure. Clean driveway. Tranquil garden," I affirmed. "It's yours, if the documents so state." And they did. A handshake finalized the transaction. No bartering. No charades. Merely straightforward completion. That day, I departed with my guitar, my timepiece, my fishing rod, and a lucidity that money can't acquire. My automobile exited the driveway I maintained for years. I didn't glance back. I didn't require it. Some seek closure. I obtained mine within a manila envelope and a signature. I shifted into the vacant apartment next door, a short-term lease. Smaller, less complex, yet containing all I required. Walls void of betrayal's echo, rooms untouched by feigned affection, and silence I selected, not the one imposed upon me. That night, I ignited a candle not for others, but for myself. Such is the burning of what was false that sometimes all one needs is a peaceful room to discern what persists. The documents bore my signature before midday. As simple as that. My name was detached from the dwelling I once deemed home. I stood outside the rental next door, arms folded as Terrence's moving truck parked in the driveway I had previously shoveled during victories, the same one where Callie used to rollerblade alongside me while holding my hand. He acknowledged me with a wide grin, cargo shorts, and a barking pit bull in the back seat. It was almost symbolic. The dog, frequently the subject of Marisol's complaints, has become an incontestable fixture, now beyond her claim. Contrary to my expectations, I didn't experience satisfaction. Instead, I felt tranquility. It was as if everything around me was in motion, yet I had found a space where I could simply exist. Leaning against the porch frame of my new, provisional dwelling, a beige rental with squeaky floors and unattractive linoleum, I savored the splendid view. From this vantage point, I could see our former master bedroom window, positioned third from the left, adorned with fresh curtains by an unknown individual. I had opted against blinds here. I had nothing to conceal, and for the first time in years, no one feigning observation of me. Terrence acted swiftly. I admired that quality about him. He was the kind of man who dismissed questions and emotional attachment, offering only a handshake and a strategy. He engaged two movers, swiftly moved everything in, including a flat-screen TV, tools, and an oversized leather recliner. Throughout the process, he occasionally cast furtive glances towards me, seeming uncertain about what more to say. Eventually, during a brief pause, he approached with two perspiring bottles of beer, offering one. He stated, "I don't know why, and I don't need to understand, but this is mine." We tapped our bottles in agreement. His dog, Boomer, ambled over as if it was his rightful place on my porch. The incongruity wasn't lost on me. Previously, Marisol had lodged a noise complaint about Boomer's barking disrupting her online classes. Now, Boomer's deep, soothing snore served as the background music for her eviction. Or perhaps it was just a reminder. I had a week, from the closing to their return, to witness the house's transformation. 7 whole days to observe the change. My home transformed into another's, and I didn't miss a single moment. I observed Terrence swapping out the doormat, noticed the repainting of the color we had chosen together back in 16, during that weekend when we vowed to make this place ours at last. I watched as furniture moved in, new frames adorning the walls, casting new silhouettes behind the windows. I heard Terrence's old-school soul music at night, the same tunes I hummed while washing dishes long ago. Hearing it from the place where no one had listened to me for years felt peculiar. In this rental, I dwelt with minimal belongings: a couch, a mattress on the floor, my guitar in a corner. I often dined on the porch during evenings, my meal balanced on my lap, warm tea or soda in hand, simply enjoying the serenity. No demands, no feigned gratitude, just simple sincerity. It was strangely liberating, more so than I had anticipated. I no longer needed to act or ask about others' feelings. I didn't have to tread carefully if the atmosphere changed. I didn't need to feign ignorance regarding the frequency my name was omitted from discussions, arrangements, and image descriptions. But then Thursday arrived. They returned in the middle of the afternoon. A slick black SUV parked in the driveway I no longer possessed. I recognized its sound before I even saw it. Callie's preferred playlist blaring. Laughter. The sound of luggage wheels rolling on concrete. I remained seated on my porch, a paperback book in my hands, my heart as tranquil as untouched water. Marisol emerged first, donning a wide-brimmed sun hat, the kind symbolizing luxury and arrogance, and oversized sunglasses. Her skin bore the hue of the Italian sun, her wrists adorned with new bracelets. She halted halfway to the front door, dragging her luggage behind her. Callie followed, talking excessively on her phone, until she looked up and smiled at the sight of their house. That smile didn't persist. Marisol reached for the front door as if it were hers, as if habit would save her. She inserted her key, turned it, but heard nothing. She furrowed her brow, attempted again, exerting more force on the lock. Still no response. When she paused, her eyes narrowed at the doorbell camera, noticing the altered design smaller and sleeker than before. Callie was about to ask if something was wrong with the door when she spotted the for sale sign now turned into a sold sign in the yard. Her lips parted, replaced by confusion, then disbelief. Marisol stared at the sign as though it had materialized from fog and deceit. The sound of the deadbolt turning echoed, revealing Terrence, who opened the door, sandwich in one hand and Boomer's leash in the other. "Can I assist you?" he questioned. Marisol blinked, stepped back. "This is our house," she stammered. Terrence glanced at the sign over his shoulder. "Not anymore," he responded calmly, producing a document from his pocket, the proof of the sale's legality, finalized 3 days prior. She suggested showing the paperwork if desired, her hand shaking as she reached for her phone. It seemed an error. This couldn't be. Callie fell silent, staring around the house, betrayal in her eyes. Then she spotted me. Her face twisted, she pointed. "Dad." I casually raised my teacup towards them and then picked up my phone. Marisol's phone vibrated in her hand moments later. I watched her read the message. "You should have confronted me upon return from Rome. Instead, here is your glimpse of truth." I rose, entered the house, and closed the door. No words needed. They were now excluded from the house, my trust, our shared life that I once managed. The new inhabitant inside, he had a boisterous dog and no remorse an ideal match. They looked bewildered, like strangers in the wrong place. Callie held her phone, slightly open-mouthed, as Marisol persisted in wearing an extravagant sun hat reminiscent of a perfume commercial. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose, revealing eyes that switched from astonishment to something bordering on fear. Terrence, gripping Boomer's leash, cocked his head as if they were peddlers offering unwanted merchandise. Marisol advanced, dialing her phone again, seemingly hoping the lock would unlock upon pressing call. "This must be a mistake," she whispered more to herself than to him. This is our home. You can't just..." Terrence interrupted, his tone measured and unconcerned. "Ma'am, your name isn't on anything significant. The person who owned this house transferred it. A cash transaction. Finalized days ago. The deed bears my name now, not yours." Callie looked back and forth between them, clearly bewildered. "But hold on, how is this?" She turned to Marisol, whispering, "Did you know about this secretly hidden affair?" "I didn't honestly," Marisol stuttered, trying to make sense of the puzzle that seemed to have been destroyed. He couldn't do such a thing. Observe from my rental house's drapes." The tea in my hand had grown cold, but I hadn't stirred to get more. This was the moment I had longed for, not out of petty motives or revenge, but to restore balance, to give the truth a tangible form they couldn't ignore. Marisol retreated from the door and stared at the house in front, as if it were an unfamiliar place. The porch now boasted Terrence's custom-made mat that read "No Drama Zone." There were potted plants on the steps, his, not mine, and a wind chime hanging from the beam. The air felt altered, not because of the house itself, but because it no longer resonated with her presence. The power dynamic had changed. Callie's shoulders stiffened as she fixed her gaze on the for sale sign. "This isn't a joke," she murmured softly. Terrence merely shrugged. "I wasn't joking." He firmly closed the door, eliciting a weak bark from Boomer as the latch secured again. The ensuing quietness was oppressive, echoing when one's expectations are snatched away in broad daylight. Marisol slowly turned around, scanning the street, and that's when she spotted me. I didn't hide or retreat. I remained visible. In my ordinary shirt and frayed jeans, cup in hand, the window slightly open to reveal the undeniable truth. She squinted through her sunglasses, momentarily frozen, then cautiously raised her hand, as if uncertain whether it was a greeting or a shield against what was approaching. Callie looked in the same direction. Her eyes widened. "Dad," she called out, her voice cracking like it did when she was 8 and had broken something valuable. I remained silent, just gazed back. Not with animosity. Without the chilling glares they had trained me to anticipate in recent years. No, instead, I gazed at her with indifference. With a calm, unyielding tranquility, Marisol grabbed her phone once more and dialed. I observed her shoulders tense as she waited. My own phone buzzed and vibrated within my pocket. I declined the call. It rang again. This time, she left a voicemail, the kind I used to leave for them when they failed to attend dinner, when plans altered without warning, when birthdays were overlooked due to emergencies that never seemed to necessitate documentation. Her silence then was deafening. Yet now, my silence echoed more profoundly. Afterward came the text, "Speak with me." I placed the mug on the windowsill, picked up my phone, and typed out my message. "You should have confronted me in Rome. Instead, here's your glimpse of truth." I pressed send. From across the road, I watched her read it. Her mouth opened, her lips twitching as if to argue, but no words emerged. Collie glanced over her shoulder, puzzled. What did he say? Marisol remained silent. She placed her phone in her bag and stood motionless, her hands hanging limply by her sides. There was no drama, no crying, no outbursts. These were events for a later time, I sensed. But in that instant, they faced the reality of consequences arriving without ceremony. They moved towards the SUV at a snail's pace, as if gravity had intensified and betrayal had turned their bodies to stone. Collie stopped near the lawn's edge, looked back at the house once more, and stared at where my wind chime used to hang, the one she made in sixth grade art class. It was absent now, packed away like the trust that for years she hadn't recognized as limited. I resumed my seat, watching as the SUV departed. No farewells, no blares from horns, only tire sounds on asphalt and a shadow that disappeared without an audible trace. That night, the neighborhood seemed altered. Terrence's porch light was brighter than mine had ever been, and Boomer barked at every shadow as if announcing a fresh start. I wasn't bothered. It wasn't my porch anymore. Yet, the tranquility I experienced, knowing they had exhausted their hiding places due to their decisions, felt more soothing than quietness. That night, I slept better than in years. Free from guilt. Free from pondering if I was overthinking things. Free from late-night debates about tone or intention. Just sleep. And somewhere in town, possibly at her sister's house, I envisioned Marisol lying awake. Not because she missed me, but because, for the first time in her managed and polished world, she couldn't locate the perspective that depicted her as a victim. She embarked on a girl's trip to Italy. Upon returning, she was greeted by someone else's doormat. Equitable exchange. I didn't set an alarm. I knew precisely when they'd arrive home. I had lived with Marisol long enough to discern her routines, even the ones she was unaware of. She was a being of order masking as spontaneity, perpetually maintaining an intentional disarray. And Callie, indeed, mirrored her mother's moves like a dancer echoing the lead. So, when I heard the SUV arrive early the following morning, before most of the neighborhood woke up, I was already awake, already settled in my rental's living room with a mug of black coffee and the curtain slightly pulled back. The birds were just starting their morning melodies. It should have been serene, and it was for me. I observed as the car door closed more forcefully than necessary. Marisol was already enraged. Her face was twisted in astonishment, fury tightly wound around her jaw, ready to shatter her teeth. She stormed towards the house and started shaking the doorknob as if it owed an explanation. Terrence had departed for work. His pickup truck was absent, but Boomer barked from within, a low, growling sound that mirrored the atmosphere. "This is our home," she bellowed, pounding her hand against the door. "Open this blasted door." "It's illegal." "It isn't legal." Her voice echoed down the quiet street, stirring a few birds and likely some neighbors, yet none ventured outside. No one wished to disrupt a tantrum, especially one so powerful it disturbed the tranquil morning peace. I continued to sip. Callie remained off to the side, her arms crossed. She drew her hoodie over her head as if trying to blend into it. She didn't yell. She didn't budge either. She merely stared at the porch as if it could recall her, as if the bricks might split and draw her back inside. Then Marisol spun around, her hair streaming behind like a whirlwind caught in motion. Her phone was already in her grasp. I knew she was going to call me again. I could see the rapid tapping of the screen, the way her thumb struck the call icon fiercely. In my pocket, my phone vibrated once, then twice, then thrice. I remained unmoved. I allowed it to ring out. Then I dispatched the message I'd prepared and stored specifically for such a moment. You should have video called me from Rome. Instead, your reality tour unfolds thusly. Upon observing it, her hand fell limply, her phone screen illuminating as she stood motionless on the grass. For a brief instant, anger halted, crushed by disbelief. Then followed the cry, piercing, unvarnished, brimming with the dawning awareness that this wasn't fleeting. Not a jest or a scare tactic or an educational ploy she could circumvent. "This is inhumane, Jonas," she exclaimed, descending the porch and confronting the house on her left. "Who perpetrates such harm to their kin?" I remained upright, ambled toward the window, and withdrew the curtain entirely, eye contact established across the narrow expanse of driveway. I lifted my cup once more. No smirk, no provocation. Just recognition. She perceived me, and for the first time in years, she truly observed me. Callie's voice resonated softly amidst the tension, a murmur in contrast. "Father, pray, what's transpiring? Why are you inflicting this, that query?" That question triggered my last moment of denial, causing my jaw to tighten. I cautiously exited through the door and set foot on the porch, feeling the crisp breeze against my skin, shedding the burden of everything I had left behind. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My voice remained composed as I remarked, "You enjoyed a feast in Venice while I spent my birthday dining alone. You posted pictures of opulence while I endured a cold steak and the silence we both created. I chose to return the emptiness you gave me." Callie moved closer. "However, the house, you sold it without informing us." I stared at her, recognizing the pout that had once been used to evade trouble, a technique Marisol had taught her, rehearsed into a display of innocence. But now I was no longer watching a daughter. I was observing someone who had learned to prioritize convenience over respect. "You didn't bother to contact me, Callie. You didn't message. You didn't follow up. I covered the expenses for the trip you said we couldn't manage." Then they disappeared. Marisol spoke up, her voice trembling. "This isn't typical of you, Jonas. You've never been vindictive." I nearly chuckled. "That's the idea, isn't it? You relied on my predictability, my softness, my forgiveness. You believed that I'd tolerate your spending money, neglecting birthdays, fabricating tuition fees, and yet here I stand. But you emotionally left long before you even packed a bag. I'm merely playing catch-up." Her face contorted, lips pulling back to reveal bitterness. "This is cold." I stepped off the porch, moving towards the sidewalk where we stood. "You call that cold?" I inquired, my voice now calm and resolute. "Let's discuss growing older and pretending your husband doesn't exist. Let's talk about raising a daughter who remains unfazed by her father's exclusion. If you want coldness, look at yourself, Marisol. Look at that Instagram post. Look at that happy photo in Rome. That's cold. This, I'm simply responding." She stated, "This is balance." Yet, she was mute in return. Callie seemed on the verge of tears, but they hadn't fallen yet. They held no weight of remorse, only discomfort. I turned and ascended the stairs, moving calmly, precisely, maintaining control. "Behind you," Marisol called out one last time. "You'll regret this." Pausing halfway up, I turned back. I had long regretted my silence, but that was in the past. I no longer did. I entered and shut the door, the latch clicking sharply. From beyond, there was no sound, no knock, no footsteps. Only the wind stirring leaves, a distant bark, and the noise of a woman acknowledging her loss of power. For once, that silence didn't feel like desertion. It felt like liberation. Soon enough, they came calling the next morning. Not hesitantly, not politely. A relentless barrage, thudding like a siege ram, punches echoed against the wooden door as if seeking redemption for what had been recklessly discarded. Already awake, I sat on the floor of my rented living room, cradling a cup of strong coffee in one hand and the morning newspaper folded in my lap. I didn't jump, I didn't flinch. I simply let them knock. "Dad, Dad, please, open the door." The plea was muffled, yet I recognized the rhythm of urgency. Just talk to me. Another round of impacts against the wooden door, this time from Marisol. She wasn't shouting. Not yet. But her voice carried the sharp edge of desperation that had always surfaced when her grip on control began to falter. Jonas, you must open this door. You need to justify yourself. The audacity of such a demand made me smirk inside. Explain myself, as if I was the one who needed to provide explanations, appearing as if my solitude, my regained self-respect, was a crime-demanding explanation. I took another leisurely sip and placed the mug on the table before heading towards the door. I waited as the seconds passed, each knock echoing as a harsh punctuation mark in the lengthy prose of disregard I had suffered for years. Upon opening it slightly, just enough for them to see me, Callie was closest, red-eyed, her hair gathered carelessly into a bun, her hoodie zipped up to her chin like a shield. Marisol stood behind her, arms folded, sunglasses concealing the harm, though not entirely. I glanced at my daughter first. Her voice was tense when she inquired, "Why would you do this to us?" The question struck me directly, not because it pained me, but due to its sheer inaccuracy. Us? Where were we when they embarked on the journey to Rome, when they depleted our savings account? When my birthday went unacknowledged, with no call or message, I didn't immediately react. Instead, I slightly widened the door opening, leaned against the frame, and allowed the quiet to respond for me. Callie's countenance started to change. Her lips quivered as if she was seeking the appropriate words, but couldn't find her place in the narrative. I observed the wheels turning in her mind. This wasn't the father she recognized. I wasn't offering empty reassurances or soaking up pain like a sponge. I remained unmoved, and that frightened her. Marisol moved closer. "Jonas, we need to discuss this as adults. You can't just make such impulsive decisions like selling the house. That was Callie's home. That was our life, our past." I spoke in a soft, steady tone. "You mean the life you opted to abandon while I dined alone on my birthday?" Her jaw tightened. I continued, "Had you been truthful about the trip, about the funds, about how I apparently stopped growing up? Instead, you deceived me. You showed no hesitation when you utilized my account for a luxurious getaway, and you callously excluded me from my own family without a second thought. Now, with the locks changed and the property no longer yours to manipulate, you seek dialogue." She discarded her sunglasses then, hanging them limply from her fingers. Her eyes were bloodshot, mascara smudged beneath each one. She seemed smaller than she did in the airport photo in Rome. Smaller and genuine. "This isn't like you," she said. "You're compassionate. You're reliable. I interrupted with a soft chuckle. "That's the issue. You misunderstood my kindness as vulnerability, my reliability as compliance. You believed I wouldn't retaliate, no matter how far you pushed." Callie attempted to speak again, more subdued. "You didn't even call to warn us." I stepped fully into the doorway. Not menacing, just there. "Neither did you, Callie. I merely mirrored the silence." Her face contorted. I could see when the tears overpowered her. "I didn't intend to hurt you." I sighed. "Perhaps next time, you won't accompany those who should not be followed." Marisol gently held her daughter's arm as if to prevent a fall. "You believe you've made your point, but you've shown yourself capable of heartlessness." I replied, "No, I've demonstrated clarity. Just as you believed you could alter the dynamics of this family without consulting me, I merely reciprocated. I redefined our future." She hesitated to speak, and I didn't need to say more. I gazed at Callie, truly taking her in. "I hope you've learned from this. I hope one day you understand that love doesn't equate to invisibility. I was a loving father, a devoted husband, yet it wasn't sufficient for you too. Now I am learning to prioritize myself." Marisol extended her hand as if to pull me back into our old, routine pattern. I stepped away, softly closing the distance between us. All that remained were breaths, followed by fading footsteps. This time, I didn't see them depart. It wasn't necessary. They had abandoned me well before the property was finally sold. All I did was answer, in a calm, decisive manner, and this time, not too late. They attempted various tactics following that knock. No apologies were forthcoming, but strategies were certainly employed. Initially, it was denial, followed by allegations. The next day, my email inbox held a message from Marisol with the subject line, "Legal requirements clarified." Beneath it lay a letterhead from a nearby law firm. I knew she hadn't visited since our refinancing in 2016, requesting a meeting to discuss ownership disputes and compensation. Compensation. Sitting at my temporary dining table in the rental, essentially just a small desk I had repurposed, I smiled, not out of amusement, but because it was predictable. When power vanishes, individuals like Marisol search for something solid to stand on, and when remorse fails, they reach for legal documents. She appeared oblivious to the fact that emotionally, I hadn't moved until every legal aspect was securely in place. There were no loopholes, no ambiguities. The house had always been mine, purchased under my name, and with a mortgage signed solely by me. My credit, not hers, had qualified for the loan following her setback with a failing startup, and we never included her on the deed. She had said it wasn't necessary then. In response to my suggestion of including her name, she argued that it wasn't about whose name was on paper. We were a team, she insisted. However, her comment implied that as long as I benefited, the technicalities were inconsequential. I pulled out a file folder labeled Primary Residence from the box beside my desk, dating back to 2008. Each document within mortgage statements, insurance documents, property tax receipts, even appliance warranties bore my name and was meticulously organized, shielded from emotional manipulation. I sent the attorney the scanned deeds and closing sale receipts via email without any messages or explanations. They did not reply. Instead, I received a series of texts from Callie filled with hurt and confusion. "How could you do this without telling me? I thought we were a family. You didn't even give us a warning. That's unfair. You taught me to discuss things, not to destroy them." I held her last message for too long. She was correct in a sense. Throughout my life, I had tried to embody patience, communication, and compromise. It never occurred to me that these qualities wouldn't be reciprocated. Realizing that my daughter, who learned these skills from me, chose not to use them with me is an unusual form of sorrow. So I responded with a single sentence. Love doesn't mean allowing someone to keep the knife after they've used it. She did not reply. Marisol called twice in the afternoon that day. Across the room, I observed the phone ringing and choosing not to pick it up. No voicemail was left. I suspect she was unsure of what to say that wouldn't add to her predicament, as should our day in court ever come, she would need to justify using funds designated for tuition and bills towards a Roman vacation, including spa treatments and personal tours. She would have to explain why there was no prenuptial agreement or shared property contract, nothing that provided legal grounds. Because I held all the names on the deeds, on the accounts, on the chronicles of patience, silence, and strategy. Even her vehicle and utilities she attempted to use as weapons were under my credit and email, respectively billed to my card. It was only when I let go that I realized the extent of the infrastructure I supported. Ironically, this wasn't a plan I intentionally designed. I didn't accumulate power out of pettiness. I accepted responsibility because I believed it held significance. Because they asked me to. Due to our mutual trust, I trusted them and they trusted me. However, the bond of trust morphed into dependency, then assumptions, and eventually became manipulation shrouded in politeness. I have been the silent provider, the unacknowledged force propelling our lives as they pursued aesthetics and recognition. I purchased the house. She adorned it. I paid the bills. She posted the meals. I remained at home while they posed before hotel pools, boasting about precious moments in places I was never invited. That's not the case anymore. In the evening, I sat on the rental's modest porch, the chair groaning beneath me due to its warped wood. But I didn't care. I had a notebook in my lap, tapping a pen against the edge. It wasn't journaling. It was an inventory of things, items, responsibilities, recollections that were mine. Things for which I didn't need to apologize. Things with worth because I assigned them value, not because someone else validated them. My guitar is mine. My time is mine. The quiet in this space is mine. My name, untouched by anyone else's turbulence, solely mine. They couldn't seize that. Neither through emails, nor tears, nor manipulation posing as reconciliation. I recall the initial years when Marisol would sit beside me on that porch, savoring wine, jotting down imagined home renovations in a notebook we never utilized. During those times, she inquired about my desires, our future plans. She paid heed, or at least feigned interest. However, as the years progressed, these queries ceased, and when I posed them again, they were disregarded. "We'll find a solution," she'd respond. "Let's simply live in the present." I was unaware that the present would be Rome without me. I was oblivious to the fact that finding a solution meant I'd eventually become a phantom in my own existence. Yet, now the house is vanished. To them. To me, I have a residence again. Despite its diminutive size, despite its temporary nature, it is devoid of performance, free from pretense. It reverberates only with my thoughts, my breath, my laughter when it resurfaces. No one gazing through me, no one accessing my identity as a credit code. When people inquire about my silent house sale, I respond thus. I had indeed talked extensively about it for years through my presence, patience, and consistency. However, they seemed unwilling to listen. Yet the deed listened it bore my name when no one else would. This time, she arrived without makeup or sunglasses, wearing only a wrinkled shirt, with no jewelry adorning her. Her expression hovered between defiance and exhaustion. I spotted her from the corner of the street, moving slowly, uncertainly but determined to reach my porch, as if it were her last resort. Boomer gave one bark from Terrence's window next door before retreating back into his corner. Even he understood this wasn't a time for interference. Marisol halted at the edge of the porch, her hand tracing the banister as if seeking stability. She glanced around at the chipped paint, sagging plants forgotten to be watered, the folding chairs substituting for proper furniture. She looked at me without speaking, only sipping coffee and leaning back. I had no intention of making this conversation easier or softer. "I just want to talk," she said eventually, her voice trembling not from emotion but exhaustion. It wasn't for yelling anymore. It was to salvage what she could, or at least rewrite how the fall occurred. I gestured toward the second chair, the one I had pulled out for a neighbor the day prior. She sat hesitantly, as if worried the chair might collapse beneath her. There was a pause before she broke the silence. "You embarrassed us," she said. I stared at her, allowing the words to settle. She remained steadfast. I exhaled through my nose, then met her eyes. "You abandoned me on my birthday and squandered my money on a trip you lied about. You didn't call or text. You posted pictures of your adventures and sunsets as if I didn't exist. You're upset because things didn't remain as they were when you came back, and now you accuse me of shifting the world's axis." She sighed softly, gazing down at her hands. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she murmured. "Then what was your purpose, Marisol? Was it to teach Callie about betrayal in stunning detail? To show her that abandonment is acceptable as long as the setting is picturesque?" Her expression crumpled as if I had struck her. I hadn't raised my voice. I didn't need to. The truth carries its own weight when delivered calmly. "You believe what I did was harsh," I said, leaning closer now, resting my elbows on my knees. "Yet, it wasn't me who crafted this situation. You did. All I did was let the repercussions of your choices come to light." Her shoulders stiffened. I didn't think you had that in you." And there it was, the most candid thing she'd said in years. The foundation of it all. I was meant to be secure, reliable, the one who would forgive and bear the pain, carrying the burden in quiet resignation. I acknowledged with a nod. Indeed, that was why it lasted for so long. She studied me now, truly saw me. Not as the man she molded to match her image, not the interchangeable husband she could ignore while pursuing some fantasy of glamour and freedom. She recognized someone else, someone who had nothing left to lose, but everything still to acquire. "I never intended for you to feel forgotten," she murmured, "but you made me feel forgotten nonetheless." A single distance between us, strained and awkward. The wind fluttered the edge of her blouse, the rustling leaves providing a soundtrack that was undeserved. She sat up straight. I've been staying at my sister's place. Callie isn't speaking to me. She's furious. She believes this is all my fault. I chuckled softly, humorlessly. Wise girl. She sighed. I don't want it to end like this. What exactly is this, Marisol? I inquired. The home? The marriage? The facade? Please allow me to clarify. I didn't terminate anything. I merely stopped deceiving myself. She blinked in surprise. Difficult. Her hands tightly knotted together in her lap, as if trying to extract some form of herself from her fingertips. You were always so composed, she stated, even when I provoked, even when I overstepped boundaries. I nodded. That was my mistake. I wrongly assumed tranquility equated with virtue. I believed if I maintained a serene facade, no one would recognize how deeply I was struggling. Now, her lips quivered. We were unhappy. I didn't know how to express it. So you traveled to Rome instead. She looked away. I sat back. I am no longer angry. And that makes this more painful for you. You expected me to rage. Thought I would spiral or pursue you. Demand an explanation. But I've had enough of explaining things that people who care about me should never need to understand. I thought you'd always be present. That is why you ceased to appear. Because you believed I never would. Tears finally filled her eyes. Yet, I didn't extend my hand towards her. Not anymore. That was the man I once was. He resided in a home I no longer possessed. I apologize, she said. Peaceful. Honest. Yet it's over. I acknowledged with a nod. I accept your words signify. No, I interjected softly. It means I understand your remorse. However, it doesn't erase your actions. And it doesn't imply I want you back. You leveraged my compassion as a crutch, Marisol. You instilled the same habit in our daughter. And then both of you jumped from a high diving board expecting me to catch you with a smile. But I've had enough of the act. I've had enough of softening your falls. She rose slowly, her legs trembling. I stood up as well, reached for the door behind me. She retreated. So that's it then. I nodded once. That's equilibrium. She seemed on the verge of speaking more a plea, a threat, a memory to use against me. But she remained silent, just the burden of being held responsible. She turned and walked away, more slowly this time. No fuss, no parting words, just quietness. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and allowed tranquility to return. Some people label truth as harsh, but I know differently. Truth does not annihilate, it discloses. Sometimes the kindest action is to cease shielding individuals from it. The instant I flung open all windows simultaneously, the dwelling seemed to release a sigh. A gentle breeze swept across the living room, stirring the edge of a frail curtain and pushing the sting of recent agony into every nook. It wasn't grand, this rental, but now it was mine. At least, the atmosphere within it was truthful. The walls no longer bore disputes. The floor ceased to resonate with the weight of a love that had crumbled under the burden of presentation. It was merely space, silent, illuminated, uncompromisingly basic. I'd redecorated the porch during the weekend following Marisol's final visit. Not from spite, not as concealment, but because I desired something signifying a commencement, something new. I selected a subdued shade of sage green, nothing ostentatious or fashionable, just soothing and grounded. Nothing for show, simply a tranquil spot where a man could savor his coffee in serenity. I set sunflowers in various pots by the steps, not bothering about their unevenness. Despite their lean, they turned towards the sunlight, which felt sufficient. Every morning, I would sit on that porch with my mug, watching the world awaken. Some neighbors nodded, while others avoided eye contact. Gossip had circulated. A mild scandal, though they're too polite to acknowledge it. Apparently, I sold the house while they were in Italy, overheard from two teens on bikes. One of them whispered, savage, grinning as if I had shattered the walls of suburban normality. I remained silent, allowing them their misconceptions. People often do. The truth was, I didn't act out of savagery. I did it to find peace. And now I could. It was strange how swiftly tranquility settled once I ceased fighting for something that had long departed me. The nights were peaceful again. I slept without grinding my teeth. I ate without waiting for approval. Despite their absence, it didn't leave a void. Instead, it felt like a new opportunity. Not for love, but for self-discovery. I still occasionally caught glimpses of Marisol and Callie, residing with Marisol's sister, just a short drive away but feeling like distant worlds. They no longer strolled the neighborhood or attended our communal meetings, nor did they peer into familiar yards. On the infrequent times they passed by, they deliberately avoided eye contact. I never minded the waves. It wasn't to taunt them, but because I stood unconcealed. Callie was the one who averted her gaze most often. Her expression hardened in the passenger seat, eyes glued to her phone, feigning invisibility towards me. That pain came from a different source than Marisol's infidelity. Callie once belonged to me. She was my little companion, the one who would gather dandelions as if they were treasures and ask me to braid her hair even when I didn't know how. But children learn what they are taught. For years, I watched as she altered the regulations, and our last conversation was the one she elected to bypass. Yet, I always waved, every time. She needed to comprehend that the door wasn't permanently sealed. It was simply closed until she learned how to knock. One day, while sanding the homemade table on the porch, Terrence ambled by with Boomer in tow, his tail wagging as if he had never experienced a bad day. Terrence halted at the fence and leaned against it. "Ever planning to share what truly transpired?" he queried. I grinned. "Would it alter anything?" He shook his head. "No, I simply enjoy grasping what triggers a person to rise up and overturn the chessboard." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I wiped the dust from my hands and gazed at the street. The house that once belonged to me appeared altered now, with new blossoms, a fresh coat of paint, Boomer's playthings scattered around the yard. It was no longer an emblem of my suffering. It had become another person's life, yet strangely, I found comfort in that. It felt like the ideal sort of obliteration. It wasn't a single instance, I admitted later. It was countless dismissals, hundreds of suppressed words, a lifetime of appearing for people who no longer recognized me. Terrence nodded as if he had heard this melody before. Now I gaze at the porch, the sunflowers reaching toward the light, the table crafted by my hands, the silence that no longer constricts. Now I awaken and everything I see returns to my possession once more, not in a legal sense, but in the singular sense. He slapped the fence once. That's the authentic one. After he departed, I remained on the porch for quite some time, watching as shadows extended across the street. I pondered upon the amount of energy I once expended attempting to prove my value, at home, in dialogues, even in the silences where I waited for acknowledgement that never arrived. It's tiring, trying to be noticed by those who choose not to perceive. This porch didn't demand anything from me. It didn't withhold warmth or manipulate space. Instead, it cradled me silently, peacefully. That evening, I prepared a meal for one: pasta, garlic bread, and a glass of red wine. I lit a single candle not as an expression of loneliness, but rather as a tribute to tranquility. Soft music played in the background, accompanied by a crumpled napkin and an aged book on my table, devoid of any judgmental whispers. This wasn't the life I had envisioned for myself, but it became the one I reclaimed. There is a unique beauty in reclaiming your own narrative, in declaring, "This is where I draw the line." No applause was needed to certify its worth. For a house is merely bricks and mortar, but a home is wherever you no longer feel compelled to justify your silence over their chatter. This porch, this solitude, this personal moment, this morning coffee and serene smile, all of it embodies the essence of home.